Euclid.
Yes,
Okay. I'm Austin Lugo.
I'm Andrew Harp.
This is With Nothing to Say.
Let's talk about Nocturama.
This week we watch Nocturama, and
Yeah.
Brandon and I have been working on a movie script lately. For the past year or so, Brandon's
Mhm.
really wanted to write a script. It's funny because the whole reason he's kind of he's not really into movies, but the whole reason he's into script writing and working on sets is originally because of Sir Mel Hayes. That was the first set he ever worked
Mhm.
on. And since then, for whatever reason, he's found a real love for working on set. And every time I go on set now here in Reno, which is pretty often, I mean, at the very least once a month, sometimes two, three, four times a month, he's
Mhm.
almost always there. He loves being on set. He's kind of gotten a real passion for it. He's even taken film classes at UNR now. So I feel a bit responsible for his love for
Cool.
film, and
Yeah.
I'm very happy for that. But for the past year or so, he has been talking about wanting to write the script, and he's been talking about the idea. And I kept telling him over and over again, every time I tell someone that I'm a filmmaker, every time that I tell someone that I make films for a living, everyone has the greatest idea, right? Everyone wants to pitch you their great idea. And 99% of the time, it's a shitty idea. But the point isn't the idea, right? Everyone has ideas. There's nothing valuable in ideas. What's valuable is actually doing it. And I kept telling him for the last year, write the
Mhm.
script. Like, if this is really any good,
Yeah, I agree.
go and actually write it. And we'll figure out what to do from there, whether we ever
Mhm.
shoot it or not. And so now that it's summer and I have the summers off because I am a teacher, which thank God, I was like, you know what? Let's just sit down and write it together. So we meet 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, for like 3 hours, and we write. And the reason I'm telling this story is because he has this weird obsession with telling us or putting in the script like these very specific descriptions of which direction people are walking, completely meaningless. It adds nothing to the script, but he's very
Mhm.
specific about it. And there's kind of this ongoing joke that we hold on people walking for multiple minutes at a time. And at some point, we have so much of that in there. It seems like we've spent more time writing about people walking than we've actually spent doing stuff. And I thought about that with this film because the first half of this film, which is amazing, is
Yeah, spectacular.
there's almost no dialogue really until
No, not really.
I mean, there's some like towards the end of the first half, but for most of the first
Mhm.
half, there's almost no dialogue. And what little dialogue there is almost non consequential. It doesn't really add anything to the story itself. And it really is just people walking around. And it's so fuck, man. It's so it's crazy because he's able to create this tension. And even though
Mhm.
for a very long time we don't really know what they're doing. Like at first I
Yeah, we
thought,
don't.
oh, it was
Yeah, we
some
don't
sort
really
of
get what's going on. Yeah.
heist. That was my guess. Is like they were gonna rob a bank
The
or
language of this the Benello, even though you don't really know what's going on expositionally because of like the way the Benello, you know, edits and paces everything, the language that he uses, we are able to immediately understand like, okay, like this is like a procedural, like something is happening,
yes.
right? Like you're and then it all comes together, of course, eventually. But yeah.
Yeah, it's a master of film grammar, and I think part of the reason it works is because he's playing off of a very popular genre. He's playing off the
Yep.
heist genre, so using a lot of
Yeah, he
those
is.
tropes without having to use the literal language, right? He's using the film language of these sorts of
Yeah.
things, and I think the score also plays a huge part in this. I think
Hmm.
even though the
Yeah.
score isn't like it's like it's
Composed
got
by
playing,
Bertrand
but yeah.
composed by Bertrand Bonello.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, he actually before he even made a single movie, he was like a professional musician at the age of like 5 years old and was in
Oh shit.
bands and he was like a studio musician and stuff like that. So he's very talented and he makes music for all of his movies.
Wow. That's cool. No, that makes so much sense because there really is something sort of musical about this film, and there has to be
It is. It is, yeah.
when, I mean, obviously it's not a musical, quote unquote, but there is something about this idea of musicality in the film and the way this film works and the way it's edited. And I think without
Yeah.
that music, I don't know if you have that tension in the first half of the film that you
Hmm.
have, because at the end of the day, it really is just people walking around and you don't see really them
Hmm.
doing much of anything. And they never explain it for a large part of the film. And that's what's so amazing because he has this incredible ability to keep us intrigued, right? To keep us watching, to keep us almost hypnotized in what they're
Right.
doing. And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that it's so, as you're saying, it's procedural. Like it's very clear that they have practiced this hundreds of times. The
Right.
way
They
that they
thought about
move,
it. Yeah.
every single
Like I like when that one character I've got kind of like the letterbox like lists like Sabrina. I love when she is like you said they've rehearsed it like before she goes into the hotel to talk to say that she has like the room.
Mhm.
She like says it to herself first before she goes in, and then later you see her practice it with her brother like to go over like the line again, right? As if she's like in a play or something like that. Like she's saying it to herself to make sure that's like convincing or
Mhm.
whatever. Like that is a good kind of like moment with the audience where if you don't know what's going on, it's like, okay, like there's there's like an architecture to it. Like there's a plan. And the thing too is that they do a lot of mundane things, like you say. Like they go on the bus, they take photos of like random things, they send text messages and stuff like that. They throw away their phones, which is a good, a good uh it's a good like action in the
Yeah.
vernacular of like procedurals like this to give you the indication that they're doing something illegal. But I love too when a person gets fucking shot and killed like in the first half, like it's quite shocking. Like it's quite it reverberates when it actually does happen.
Yeah, the way in which everyone just they know exactly what they're supposed to do, and you can see, and I think this is part of the reason that it works, is there is a series throughout the first half of the film of these tiny, almost minuscule hills they have to go over, right? These tiny things that they have to achieve. Like there's that great moment where they're trying to get into the building, they're trying to use their card, and
Right.
it's not working. And there's a great reveal here
With
with
the
the
security guard,
security
yeah.
guard, because at first you
Yeah.
think the security guard is sort of
Oh
like
no,
this
yeah.
antagonist, like, oh no, oh shit, he's gonna find out. And then later you learn that no, the security guard is part of the plan. Like
Yeah,
they've
he's in on it.
they, they've spent months. They originally got him the job so they could do this specific thing.
Hmm.
And the way they edit is weird because they'll, after sort of like the first 20 minutes, they'll sort of jump in time, and it's never clear what that
Yeah.
time is. Like it doesn't know if it's like a year, 6 months. There's no sense of, 3 weeks later or, 6 weeks
It doesn't
before.
matter. Like it
And
doesn't,
it's
look at
completely arbitrary, but it does create
yeah.
this sense of confusion
Yeah, I
purposely,
can.
because it's hard to tell what's going on when. I mean, you figure it out as an audience member, but it can be, it's definitely disorienting the first time they do it because there's no warning that they're going to do it. And it's suddenly
I
like, wait a minute.
you can kind of tell when they're wearing like different clothes
Yeah.
for the most part.
Mm.
People, I think some of the characters like do change in the first half, but like when you see characters together like out of nowhere, even though they're in different places, out of you kind of realize like okay, like we're back in time.
Yeah.
But Benella doesn't feel the need to I don't know put like a filter on it or I don't know change like the color temperature or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's just kind of like whatever. We're going back in time to explain this or whatever.
Yeah. You get it. It doesn't need to be explained. And I think
Yeah.
that's the best way to do it. He trusts his audience. And this is something that Brandon has really been struggling with, like with our script, is, and this is true with a lot of new writers, not just Brandon, but all the kids that I work with, is they are terrified that the viewer will not get the joke or they won't get this thing. And so
Yeah.
they have to explain it in this extreme detail, and it kind of ruins the whole piece because it doesn't make sense because people don't work like that. People don't think like that. And one of the signs of a great filmmaker is their ability to trust the audience, to just be like, here are the things I'm not going to explain to you, figure it out. And I think Bertrand does an incredible job of that. There is a lot in this film where he is just saying, here are a set of things,
Yeah.
go and figure it out. And you do as the audience member because you're not treated stupid. I mean, yeah, it requires a little more
You get
interaction.
maybe a little bit of paying attention, right? Not being on your phone, right? Like, because if you're looking at your phone and you look up and you're like in a different time period, like a different moment in time, it's kind of
Mhm.
like, what, like, so it requires a lot of attention for sure,
Yeah,
especially the first half.
not
Second
as
half is pretty
much.
linear,
Yeah.
is quite linear. But yeah, like the first half, like you need to, you need to pay attention.
Yeah, and I'm one of those people. I don't know why. Like if I go to a movie theater, watch a movie, I can sit down, watch the whole movie, not a problem. But
Uh-huh.
for some reason when I'm at home, I pause it like 20 times because I gotta go to the bathroom, I gotta
Yeah, I
grab
mean,
something to
yeah,
eat, I gotta do this. But
I
I
do
made
that
sure,
too.
and, sometimes if the movie's in English, I'll admit every now and then I'll leave it on, right? And I'll walk out of the room because I can still hear it, and I'm like, I get the gist of it. But this is definitely a film
Yeah,
where
it's fine.
you cannot walk out of the room. Like you cannot leave for a moment, especially in the
Yeah,
first half. Second half, maybe, but
mhm.
every single moment is so
There's so many good moments. Oh,
visually important that you can't leave it. I mean, gosh, just the way he's able to create tension. I mean, every time you see a police officer, even before you know what you're doing, like that moment where she's
mhm.
putting, I guess, some sort of
It must be like some kind of like like fire light,
yeah,
like some kind of like gas or
like
something like that on top of
explosive
it.
or
It's
something.
it's a statue of the Joan of Arc.
Yeah, and the police officer comes, and you have this intense moment where you have
Yeah,
that
you're like,
conversation.
huh?
I mean, it's me. Like the police officer doesn't actually care. Like he's just wandering around, but all these things are happening from the perspective of our young characters here, which I think
Yeah,
is another reason that it works is they're able to sort of elevate these tiny things because all the things that happen to them until the moment that someone gets shot are
yeah.
really sort of these extremely minor things. Like it's not like they're running from the
Mhm.
police and all these big things are happening. All the things that are happening have, they're things that happen every single day that, very, we're all very used to these sorts of things. But when they're in this world, when they exist in this way, it's everything's kind of elevated to the nth degree.
Mhm.
Everything feels like it has that much pressure.
Yeah, yeah, and um yeah, them going like through a corridor, like them going upstairs, like is
Mhm.
them kind of like walking around like office buildings essentially. Like it's not them, it's not like a Mission Impossible situation where they
No,
have to like it's literally them going into an office building, like breaking into an office building and they're on a floor where there's no one
there's
there
no one.
and putting a bomb there. And that's basically what they're doing, right? Just to kind of like say like they're planning bombs. They're essentially planning, I think like a handful of bombs in like different locations. I think like a government building they want to blow up a floor at like the floor of um like a at for like HSBC the one guy he shoots like I think like the head of HSBC, which is a bank.
Yeah.
So like and all of these that and they want to all send them all off at once.
Hmm.
um and you get that pretty like I love that part where they're like sitting and they're talking about like the semtex, like the bomb material.
Yeah.
That part's really, really good. They like talk about like the semtex and then they have that, of course, very musical moment, like you said. Again, and I agree with you highly. It is a very like musical movie, like the use of score, the use of songs,
Hmm.
like and the songs too, the use of songs we'll talk about in a minute, I guess, but like the use of songs is amazing. Like that moment where they like dance like they get high like one last sesh before they go and one last like high sesh before they go and plant the bombs and stuff. It's a great moment. Like yeah, like again, that first half is just amazing the way it's able to kind of like teeter and kind of like go back in time at like at any moment. Um and it's a great cast too. I mean, great cast of young people. I think the only adult, right, is like supposedly the guy with the mustache, Greg, who shoots and
Hmm.
kills the HSBC business guy. Um, I love that when he goes up to the door and he knocks on it, and the guy just answers and he just fucking shoots. You can like see it coming. And I love too when he goes outside while he's like still holding his gun, like in plain view of everyone, because he's like
Yeah.
in shock basically.
That that is a great moment. And I forgot to mention this, but I think it is kind of invaluable to the film is they do this throughout the entire film, not just the first half, but they constantly put up what time it is
Right,
because
during the first half, yeah.
sometimes he'll do this thing where okay, it's three or it's 2:25 and then they'll do their
Mhm.
thing and they'll jump to this other person and then he'll jump back like 10 or 15 minutes. Like it's not like
Right.
which is kind of another layer of confusion. And he does this in the second half
Yeah.
too, which not only
That's
is he
true. He does that.
jumping back in time to say like days before, weeks before, but he'll also do this thing where purposely, right, he'll have a scene play out and then he'll be like, all right, now I'm going to jump 15 minutes into the future and I'm going to jump 45
Hmm.
minutes into the past. And
Right.
it's very meticulous. And I think this is a very meticulous film. You kind of talk about how this is sort of a procedural and everything's sort of planned out. The characters have everything planned out, but also just the way it's filmed, the way it's made is
The
very
movies, yeah. Yeah.
meticulous. I mean, every single shot, just it's very important that it looks this very
Hmm.
specific way because the way time works in this is
Hmm.
it feels convoluted, but it's not. It's very like this is planned out. This is exactly how it's going to be. And so you're
Hmm.
constantly jumping through time. And even though you don't need the, 3 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago, you
Yeah.
do need that, hey, it's 2:15. And he's playing off of that, right? He's playing
Yeah.
with the idea because he's almost playing off the joke of these Mission Impossible and these types of movies, these James Bond types of movies where like it's 2:25 on a Saturday and that like time is completely meaningless. Where in
Right.
this film, what time it is very important because all of the bombs are supposed to go off at like 3:15. Is that
They're
or
no, they're supposed to all,
sometime?
well, it's they talk about they when he goes back in time later in the movie while they're in the middle of like trying to commit the heist, they have
Yeah.
like that discussion where they're just like, we need to meet at the mall at like 7. So you're
Right.
kind of like, oh, okay, so like you're kind of like you're looking forward to when it's like around 7 because that's when you know like it'll be complete.
Yeah.
And yeah, he does that thing later on in the movie too, where you talk about where um the cops shoot for the first time, right? Where you get like a dozen different like angles and perspectives of that same moment. It like, keeps replaying and replaying and replaying to show you that like same moment of the cop shooting first from different angles, right? And I think which is crazy because again, like the um again like you talked about like the movie's very meticulous and it has like this really powerful architecture and sense of place in a way that's hard to do. You know what I mean? Like I can't imagine like whether it's the first half or the second half, they both kind of have this sort of like flow to it that I feel like would be really hard to accomplish because you have all these different characters, they're all kind of like doing different things, and yet you still feel very connected to what is happening. You're not too confused, I would say, for the most part, which I feel like you could easily be confused in with another director. Another director would completely flub it and make you
Mm.
be like, okay, what's going, you know what I mean? Like, what's going on? Like, I don't understand, like we're over here, we're over there, like what's going, I think a viewer could easily be confused, but here, again, whether it's the first half or the second half, it just feels like, I don't know, he's just able to really kind of, it just feels um it feels right. Like I don't have any complaints in terms of like the confusion element, I guess.
Yeah, I've been watching a lot of on Criterion Collection. They have an ensemble cast collection, and I've sort of been working my way through those. And the thing that makes a good ensemble cast from a bad, because even Criterion Collection, I wouldn't say they're all necessarily hits, at least for me. Obviously, someone
Yeah,
thinks
not every movie they have on there is going to be good.
someone thinks that they're good, but I think the reason a film like this works because it is an ensemble cast film, quote unquote, because there are all these different characters, even though they're not maybe perhaps as famous as some ensemble cast, but it is a large group of characters
Yeah.
doing this thing. Is they all have a specific thing that they want, and there's always something standing in their way, and it's specific to them. So even though they all have, at the end of the day, they all have that same goal of blowing up these different places and then meeting and then
Yeah.
getting away with it. Like, yeah, that's the big thing that they all want. But the reason that they want it is specific
Hmm.
to them. And it's not really that like the reason itself doesn't have to be this big definition of who they are as a character. Rather, that part's arbitrary. It's just that each of them have their own thing that they want out of this, right? They have their own reason for doing this, and that's why it works. Where a lot of badly made ensemble casts, there's not really any sort of logic or reason for them doing the thing other than sort of the big, oh, we're going to blow up the thing. But in this film, and you see this, especially in the second half, because the second half is a lot of talking, which is interesting because there's sort of this juxtaposition where
Yeah,
the first half of the film is very open. You're going to all these different locations. Everyone's walking around. No one's really
they're
interacting
in
with.
Paris.
They're in pairs or they're alone.
Yeah.
And then in the second half of the film, you trap everyone into this one space, which is a really cool location, by the way. That mall is just so
Well,
specific, and they're trapped in there.
yeah, it's a great like location for the movie, but like the location itself is like really ugly. Like
Yeah.
it's like it's terrible. Uh Right. Like, yeah, they blew off the bombs and they're like, okay, let's hide out in this mall because I know someone, Omar works there, right? Like another guy, another security guard who for some reason kills the other security guards, even though he tells them early on that he tied them up. He's just like, I killed him. I love how later on it's like a good, it got a laugh out of me where he's just like, I told you guys I tied them up. I shot and killed them. I don't know why I did that. And yeah, like it's like this really ugly, very like consumerist environment, right? Like,
Mhm.
and you know, one of the things that like vanilla like does as a choice, and I think is a very really great kind of interesting choice, is that there's not really like any like particular political reason as to why they did it.
Mhm.
Like any specific reason. You know what I mean? Like there's no like left or right kind of like conversations going
Yeah.
on at all. The only specific thing is like the thing with HSBC. So it's like, yeah, like they're against kind of like these financial institutions that are ruining people's lives. That's pretty much the only specific thing that I
Mhm.
can point out.
Yeah. I think that's interesting that this is a film about a group of terrorists, and even though they spend the whole second half of the film stuck in this one place talking to each other, and we even see them plan it out in the first half, there's never really a conversation of, there's not that conversation of, we the proletariats, or, we
Yeah,
these group of people
we
believe,
the fascists.
we the
Yeah,
fascists, right? Whatever their
right, right.
arbitrary political movement is. And I think that's a really good
Yeah,
choice because the moment you give them whatever that political thing is you've politicized the film, and then we as viewers put our own uh, biases on them, right? We immediately say, oh, right, we
yeah,
think they must act this, they must be this way. But by kind of pulling that back, and then you do have the thing with the bank, but I mean, really, right, you go on either side, they're both kind of
yeah. It
anti
could go
that
either
sort of thing,
way.
right?
Yeah,
You could argue that for anybody. And
yeah.
I think that's the right choice. And really, the only conversations they do have that have related to it, and this is something that Bertrand seems really interested in, is this idea of notoriety, fame, infamy, particularly like the idea of age, right? They're all very young. They're all,
Well, yeah, and the other thing too, like you said, like yeah, like they're all very young, and it's also a diverse group of people,
mhm,
right? So it's not really, I guess it couldn't. So it's it's definitely not politicized left or right because it's this diverse group of like young people. That's pretty
mhm.
much all it is. It's
Yeah.
that's kind of yeah, and they're disgruntled. They're clearly disgruntled with the way that things are.
Mhm. And I think it's interesting, both the idea of burning Joan of Arc in particular. This is gonna be a weird parallel, but I think it works. There's this moment early on in the second half of the film where Omar he finds the speakers and he's playing music,
Yeah.
and the first song he plays is
Is with my hair. Willow
I,
Smith's with my hair. That's such
Willis.
a crazy song. That's like a meme song. It's crazy that they. I love like I'll never think of. I'll
Never think of
always think about
anything
that movie
else.
now. Yeah,
Always.
yeah.
That's like
I,
always going to be in my head.
and they're watching and they're that's such a crazy like song choice to have playing when they're watch the TV for the first time to see like the aftermath of what they've done.
Some of the song choices in here, like
Like the Chief Keef song, the Blondie song.
Yeah.
Yeah, like all the song choices are amazing.
They work
I think
perfectly,
they're
and
fucking awesome.
in this really strange way. And what's great about that one in particular is Omar plays the song, and then he's talking about the song. I can't remember
Yeah,
who he's talking about the song with, but he
I think
he's
it's David. I think he's talking to
I
David
think
about
it's
it.
David. Yeah, he's talking to David about it. And the thing he admires about the song is that Willow Smith made the song when she's, I don't know, 10,
She
12,
said
13.
he
She's a
said 10 years
kid.
old.
Yeah, 10 years
Yeah.
old. And sort of the idea that they admire youth. They admire the idea of
Yeah.
almost this martyrdom that has like
Yeah.
they're terrified of becoming adults, and I think that's a big part of this film. In a weird way, it's sort of a coming of age film where these people they're in that stage of life, and this is a little different in Europe than it is in the United States because in Europe, you don't high school isn't something you just go to. You have to test into high school. So at the
Uh-huh.
end of eighth grade, you take this test. And that decides if you go to sort of like you go to school of mathematics or school of science. So high school is has this kind of like collegey kind of thing.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to grow up at a younger age. And then when you are in your late teens, early 20s, even though in the US, I think we have a little bit more cushion with sort of the college years and trying to figure stuff out. But in US too, right? Once you graduate college, there is sort of this weird moment in life where you're not a kid anymore, right? You don't live with your
Mhm.
parents. You have to kind of figure out the world, but you don't feel like an adult yet because your brain isn't fully developed and you've never had to act in a way that an adult does. And that's what a lot of this film is about in a weird way. It's about growing up and trying to figure out how do we exist in
Yeah.
it, or their inability to sort of exist in this modern world and be the things that
Yeah.
everyone wants them to be.
Yeah. And I think Benella too, he kind of like he does this thing where I think he kind of like makes fun of them a little bit. Like he kind of pokes and prods at kind of like their, and I think the mall is the perfect place, right? Because the mall, it gives these young people the opportunity to do lavish, crazy things like drink alcohol, drink fine food, eat fine food,
Hmm.
wear these like expensive suits and stuff like that. Generally be, kind of like consume like generally kind of like let your inhibitions go and like and just kind of like go a little crazy and party a little bit, and celebrate. So it kind of like makes fun of that kind of, I guess, like that contradiction. But at the same time, I think he, I think he 100% has this sort of like reverence for the characters at the same time because, because I think he does believe that the kids of what they did are justified for doing it because they are, I think he recognize, I think and I think the end itself, the end of the movie kind of justifies of what they did, right? Because even though that they're these disgruntled French kids, they're not even, they're not from another country. They live in France, ostensibly they all grew up there,
Hmm.
right? They are all really smart, obviously, like they're all very like, you know, stand-up-ish, kids. But they all feel like something is wrong and that despite all their differences, despite their different races or whatever or religions, they have all decided to come together and make it happen, right? And you know, for me personally, some people might disagree. I think that's I think that's a good thing. You're right. Like I think that that you know uh, things demand action sometimes. When things get pretty messed up, I think.
Yeah, and I think there's a great moment that sort of proves that reverence that they have, even though these are contradictory characters who, on one end, they go and kill the president of a bank, and then they go into
Yeah.
the mall, and then they sort of they indulge in all these sort of capitalistic.
Yeah.
They're stealing the fine suits, right? They want to eat fine food. They're wearing the jewelry. They're playing with these toys and stuff. And also, there's this sort of reversion back to a younger self, or almost a simpler version of the
Yeah.
self. And you kind of see H. right? The one guy who becomes obsessed and spends all of his time in the toy room, right, playing with the toys, kind of a reversion back to
Yeah.
a younger self, or the person who spends all their time in the jewelry store, or
Yeah.
wearing fine clothes, that sort of thing, sort of showing a more base version of themselves. But you can see that he sort of admires these characters because at the end of the film, when the SWAT team or whatever the French version of that, they
The
come and
cops, yeah.
attack or like right they're on the news, they said, "Oh, we think these people are enemies of the state and we will not
Mhm.
negotiate." Right? There's like
Yeah, they're just
no,
like, we're gonna kill them
we're just
straight
gonna
up.
murder
Like,
them. Like
no,
there
not
is
even
no conversation
like
of
we don't even know what they want. We don't even
no.
we don't even like want to know like what
They don't care.
like to me justifies their actions,
Hmm.
right? Because they dissented and again, one of the things that they talk about in the movie is like, we set up these bombs to make and but we made sure not to kill anyone. They end up killing people, right? Like they shoot the president of the bank. Fred has to kill that one guy,
Yeah.
office guy, because he wasn't supposed to be there, so he had to kill him. And then, of course, Fred gets killed by well, we don't know, I guess for sure, but I'm pretty sure he gets killed by the
Yeah.
security guard, right?
Mhm.
Which is a good moment, right? When you hear it and then you get to see it later on. That's great. Um, but so like they try to avoid killing people, and then when they watch the news, like we never actually like really find out if they ever killed anybody with the bombs.
Mhm.
Um, but again, it doesn't really matter whether or not they killed anyone with these bombs because of how coordinated it was and because they destroyed like precious property. That's good enough to justify killing a bunch of like French born teenagers just outright with no questions asked.
Yeah.
Which again justifies their actions because they live in a country that would do that.
I would do that. Yeah.
Right.
And I think one of the haunting things about this piece is, of course, they put them in a mall where they can't hear anything. So they create this sense of
Right. They
isolation. And a couple of times they can watch the news, but mostly they're sort of isolated. They don't know what's going on.
don't have phones.
And they don't have their phones, right? Nothing's working. Well, they got rid of their phones, obviously, but when they go outside, or it's David that goes outside, I
Yeah, to
think.
smoke.
Yeah, he
Hmm.
goes outside to smoke, and then he kind of wanders around for a bit.
Yeah.
One of the almost disheartening things about this is it seems like nothing's really changed. Like it didn't do anything.
Yeah.
Like it was kind of pointless, right? Like they do this
Right.
big thing and they're trying to make this statement, try to
Right.
make a difference in the world, try to become martyrs. And you can wonder, maybe like their death in and of itself, maybe that's the martyr, maybe that's the thing, sort of move things forwards.
But they
But
don't even like it would be one that would be one thing, but the thing is that like I don't there wasn't any plan for like for them to like put out a manifesto or anything like that.
mhm,
And if they were arrested
yeah.
and maybe they could have said like, oh, this is we did this and this because this is why. No, the government, the state doesn't want to hear it. Like we don't want you to like say what you have to say to become a martyr. So my interpretation is that we need to stop with like the state reacted the way that they did is because like we don't want them to be
Hmm.
martyrs. So
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. And so then, like all these things that they do, the risks that they take, they become empty in the end because after the explosion, like nothing, there's no riots in the streets, right? There's no revolution
yeah,
from any sort of class. It's just everything goes back to normal. I mean, when he's walking down the
sort
streets,
of. Yeah.
he meets one lady. There's probably
There,
curfew or something.
well, there's that one moment too where he's walking and he walks by a random car that's on
It's on
fire.
fire.
Yeah, which I don't think they did. I think it's just like it's a
No.
great image it's a great image that when they're walking by the car that's on fire.
Hmm.
Um, I love that. Yeah. Um, I don't know. I think like I think like an action like that can still kind of like, even though it's not like maybe necessarily like perfect in terms of the way that, this idea of like a martyr or whatever, but I think actions still are kind of burrow in people.
Mm.
And I think that comes out, like you said, in the conversation with the woman on the bike who is sort of nonplussed by the action because she says it didn't surprise me. It felt like it was going to happen, right?
Mm.
Like, and so it made perfect sense that it did, So that kind of reminds me of his other movie, The Beast, which is based off the Henry James story. And the
Hmm.
Henry James story is about a woman who is in fear and in anxiety of like something going to happen. What that is, I don't know. You know,
Yeah.
it's the beast, right? It's kind of like it's like that's what the beast is, like in the title in the story or whatever. It's like not literally a beast. It's this thing behind you, like that's over your shoulder that is sort of putting you that is making you anxious that something is going to happen,
Hmm.
right? Uh and you know, Nocturama has that in there too, right? That anxiety of like, oh, something is gonna happen, something's gonna happen, something's gonna happen, right? And the thing about Bonello is that Bonello he like filmed the movie in 2015, right? And
Hmm.
he said, and I watched this interview where he's just like, you know, I made Nocturama because it just like the air in France and in Paris, it just felt like something was going to happen. So I wanted to put the feelings into this film. And then he filmed the movie, and then right before they released it, a bunch of terrorist attacks happened.
Yeah.
So I mean, like he was right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's just like it's just like the beast. This movie just feels so contemporary. You know,
Hmm.
it's just even after 10 years, it feels like the same shit.
Yeah. And it feels there's a sort of cyclicalness to the film that we're kind of just going and we're running in circles. We're doing the same thing over and over again. And our very reaction to the things that these people do, sort of, as you're saying, right, it proves the very point that they needed to do that thing. And so instead of, the government reacting this way and this sort of putting a stop to it, it actually is the very thing that proves that it needs to happen. So then it just keeps happening over
Yeah,
and over again, and it's the snake eating its own tail, right? It's the government in its own
right,
weird way is causing the terrorist attack on its own country because of the way it reacts to the terrorist attack, the way it reacts to these
right,
people. It doesn't try to negotiate with these people or talk to these people or
right.
care if they are kids or adults or anything, right? They go in there and you
Yeah.
see, and we've talked about a couple of times how meticulous this film is. And when they go in, right, they break in and they start killing all these people.
Hmm.
Most of them, right, almost all of the kids in there, they
Yeah. They
they
don't
try
have
to surrender,
weapons.
right? They
Yeah.
don't have
It
weapons.
doesn't
They put
matter.
up their
Yeah.
hands. They say, help me, right? One of them actually cries for help, like help, help,
Right at the very end.
at
Yeah.
the very
Yeah.
end.
Like in like kind of like a last grasp of like please don't kill me.
And it doesn't fucking matter, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. They don't care. Like, and they killed everyone in there. They didn't care if they were terrorists or not. Like the very fact
Like
that
they kill the homeless
they
people.
killed the
Yeah.
homeless people, like obviously not
They didn't
part
do
of,
anything wrong.
they didn't do anything wrong, but the very fact that they're there, it's like, no survivors. We don't, like, it doesn't matter who's here, we'll kill anyone. And so like they
Right.
become the villains of this piece because you're like, oh
Right.
shit. Like they will literally kill anyone who they think has
Yeah.
wronged them, whether they have or they haven't. Doesn't matter, right? It's not a thing where, oh, they're innocent until proven guilty. It's like, no, like we have decided, and they do this thing where they never tell you how they figured out that they're in the
Yeah, I
mall.
was just about to say that was something I was about to say, right? Like
Yeah.
like an American movie would do a thing where it would go back and forth, right? Where it would go back and forth with like the terrorists committing their plot and they blow something up. And then it would like maybe go back and forth of like them running away and then the cops or the FBI or whatever trying to figure it out and like, all right, zoom in, enhance, kind of like da 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 da. Again, it doesn't really necessarily matter how they found the kids in the mall,
Mhm.
right? But like things now are advanced technologically enough in security to the point where they're probably going to find you,
Yeah.
so therefore it doesn't really like going through like the motions of like what how they found them, or did they they speculate like maybe they got Greg and then maybe he like snitched on us,
Yeah.
all this stuff. Again, like Benella isn't really interested in that. He's interested in kind of like the mind of like what would compel like a young person to take action and commit a terrorist act, which is, in my opinion, much more interesting than like an FBI agent or whatever trying to do their job or whatever. Um, and kind of going back what you were saying about like the cyclical nature of it. There's that one conversation between Andre and Sarah where they're talking about like history or whatever, and he says like that great quote, civilization is a condition for the downfall of civilization.
Hmm.
Which is kind of sums up the movie, right?
Yeah. Which is it's a play on another quote too, right? Life is a what is it? Uh, it's a life is a condition for death, or something to that effect, right? The
Hmm.
very idea of being alive is the promise that you're going to die, and likewise, right? The very creation of civilization will always be
Hmm.
the destruction. So it's this inevitable thing that we can't stop, and I love the fact that they don't do that sort of American, right? The police outside, they're
Yeah,
negotiating, they're trying to figure it
we're
out
gonna find. Yeah,
because it doesn't add anything to the story, and it creates even more this sense of isolation and the
mhm.
wrongdoing, because we only get the perspective of these kids and we get to exist in their world. I mean, we
Yeah,
once we get into that mall, we don't leave that mall. The only time we leave that mall is when David walks outside, and that's it. That's the only time we ever get any sort of outside perspective. And they do this really cool thing, and they do it a couple of times because they have some really great sound design, where one of the characters will be standing at a window or something like that,
yeah,
and then
and
for a
it'll yeah,
moment, right, they'll cut outside and you'll hear all the sirens, you'll hear all the
right.
yelling and screaming and all that kind of stuff. And then you'll cut back in. So you get these sort of moments that are outside of
Hmm.
them, but almost never. So whenever you're in that mall, you're feeling the things that you're feeling. You don't know what's going to happen. You
Yeah,
don't know why they figure it out or how they figure it out,
right.
or if they're going to escape. And I think it's interesting that they learn, or rather, David learns that they've been found out.
Yeah,
And yet he doesn't, there's like this sense in almost in all the characters where they talk about like, oh, fight or flight, but then there's this third state that humans have, is that sense where like we freeze, right? It's actually fight, flight, or freeze. And you see that in all these characters, like their
yeah, they all
inability,
freeze.
like their failures, their inability to do anything in that moment. Because David doesn't tell anyone. Like he's like, oh, we'll just, he goes and tells the
He tells
uh
Andre, and
tells
Andre's
Andre.
ideas are like putting like the Semtex like on different places in the mall, but he can't. He doesn't have any ability
He
to blow
doesn't
them up.
have, yeah. Because like even what's so fascinating and interesting is they spend so much time. They are so meticulous in planning
Yeah,
out the first half, right? The explosions themselves. But then their plan to hide out, to get away, is like kind of stupid. Like it's not a good
it's
plan.
really
It's not well
it's
thought
not
out.
like well thought out because like they blow up all these things in Paris, and then their idea is to hold up like in a mall in the middle of Paris.
Which doesn't make sense.
Like they're I agree that they're like we shouldn't go home,
Yeah,
right?
that makes sense.
I think it makes sense, right? But hiding out in the mall doesn't make sense either. You know, it's just kind of like it's really weird.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, but it makes for obviously, like we said, like a very good like environment to for them to hang out in and talk in and kind of like play around with. And you get great moments of them where they're blasting music and they're lip syncing and they're dancing and stuff like that. Obviously, these moments are I love these moments. They're great. They're very kind of like, liberating, kind of
Mhm.
like you know, uh cinematic moments, right? Where it's just music and a person and they're just kind of
Mhm.
like letting go. And I love that stuff. Um and yeah, it's just one movie you aptly compare this movie to. And I'm pretty sure Benello is like a fan of George Romero. So
Mhm.
I don't think he
Yep.
he probably was thinking about Dawn of the Dead
Yep.
when he was making this movie. Because how are the cops any different than the zombies when they invade the mall?
Exactly. Yeah, because they're just these automatons. They don't have any thought process. There's no humanity to these people.
Yeah.
They're people who are there to do a job, quote unquote, right? There's no thought
Hmm.
process, and there's something in our characters too that is self-destructive. I mean, you know, they spend so much time planning and thinking about how they're going to go to these different places, right? They're going to separate. They're not going to see each other. They're not going to talk to each other. They're not going to use their phones, but then they all decide to go to the same place together. Like that's fundamentally like a terrible idea. And at some level, they have to know that, right? You can't be like
Yeah.
smart enough to think of that plan and then think that this is like to all come together.
Well,
Like obviously they need to go different places. Like
it
they
kind of,
shouldn't.
it kind of, it, yeah, it kind of goes hand in hand again with Dawn of the Dead because in Dawn of the Dead, like the plan at first seems like a really great idea, and it is a great idea at first,
Mhm.
but it doesn't. That's like an idea and you can apply like this to like probably a number of metaphors, right? But it eventually just cannot sustain itself, right?
Mhm.
Like it's just like not a sustainable idea to be hold out in this like one location forever and ever. Like it's just we gotta like you gotta run away. You gotta
Mhm.
keep away. You gotta run away as far as you can away from any of these like any semblance of what we've known as civilization, right? So um yeah, and another filmmaker too that I think like Bonello definitely takes from a lot in his movies, and I think that's a big reason why I love Bonello is because his movies definitely, at least especially with like filmmaking techniques and things like that. I'm reminded a lot of Brian De Palma, one of my all-time
Yeah.
favorite directors. He uses like split screen and like, different like editing techniques and things like that make a lot of like Brian De Palma obviously is known for ripping off Hitchcock a lot.
Hmm.
But Benel's movies aren't really like that in
No.
story wise, but he more like rips off Brian De Palma with more like technique and like
Yeah.
filmmaking like styles, I suppose. So that's definitely another reason why I like Benel's movies a lot because I like Brian De Palma. So
Hmm.
uh yeah. And yeah.
Yeah, I think on some level, and maybe this was part of their plan, especially David, because when he goes out there, like they're specifically given these very specific rules. Don't go to the
Yeah.
window, don't go outside.
Okay.
And they all immediately break them. Like, yeah, David probably
Yeah.
is the worst offender of them, but they all break the rules almost immediately because I think on one end they want to be caught. Like I think that's sort of part of their idealism of this thing is we do this
Yeah.
attack and then we get caught and then we can go and speak our truth because they think
We
there's
can go to
some
heaven.
and yeah, right, the idea of do you think we go to heaven, like we did the right thing, do we go to heaven? But of course they're never given that, even though like the irony is that they're trying to sort of destroy the civilization,
Right.
but the thing that stops them, the reason their downfall is sort of their very belief in civilization, right? Their very belief that people are just, right? Even though they're fighting this thing, right?
Yeah.
It's the belief of injustice. But at a core, right, at a much deeper level, they still believe that people are good and will do the right thing because they wouldn't have, right, hold up in that um, mall if on some level they didn't think that they'd be caught. I think on some level they thought they'd be caught and knew they'd be caught, but assumed that they would sort of have the media's attention and they'd have the opportunity to speak. But they don't, right? The media doesn't give a shit. They basically just they only shoot the outside and they never do it again. And then they just send the cops in. They never have their it's their very faith in the thing that they are trying to fight that is their destruction. It's like their own hubris.
Right. Right. Yeah. And like and again, you're right. It is like the movie, by the way, is funny. It
It
sounds
is.
dark, but it's quite funny. Like just to kind of like throw that out there. Like it is a very funny movie. His movies are funny. It kind of has this sort of like dark sense of humor that I really really like. And again, the actors are great. Like they're great young actors. They really do a good job like working with each other, kind of like bouncing off one another. They're really kind of distinct characters. By the end of the movie, like I'm thinking, like I was thinking about it now, I was just kind of like, man, like that was a good like cast of characters. You know what I mean? Like they really did a good job. Like they're really distinct and they did a really good job like bouncing off each other and interacting with each other in a way that I thought was really kind of fun to watch.
Mhm.
Um, and I feel like I haven't watched a movie like that in a long time.
Yeah.
Um, and so and again, they're really funny and they go all out, like when they put makeup on each other and everything and these are really great um and yeah, and I think like yeah, like and I just think it's so funny, you're right, like you were saying, just how woefully, you know, miss how woefully misplanned their exit was. 'Cause like when are they supposed to like leave the mall? Right? Like when like Are they supposed to like hide? Like, it's like I don't understand. So it's just it's definitely kind of like a movie that's kind of like about the absurdity of like young people trying to commit these like terrorist acts and things like that. But again, I think that Bonello still is like imparting a lot of like love into the characters and their actions as well. Like he does believe like it makes perfect sense to him, and it makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah, and Omar, I think about that moment where he tells them that he ties them up, and this is before we learn that he kills them.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if you think about it, you're like, he can't just tie him up. Like that doesn't work because now you have 4 or 5 witnesses who know all of these people have committed this
They
act.
know
Like
who Omar is.
he
Yeah.
he has to kill them. Like that is the only option. And of course he did in that moment because like they have put themselves in a place where they have to spiral downward because there is no other option at this point. I mean,
Yeah.
anyone that they meet, I mean, David, he tries to be nice to this homeless couple and they have this big,
Yeah, David, he's like an
argument.
idiot. Like he
He's
can't
an
help
idiot.
himself. Because he can't like help himself. Like he's so like the TV is not enough for him to see the fruits of his labor. Well, and the funny thing is too with David is that he wasn't even able to plant the bomb because he got scared about Fred getting shot.
Yeah.
So like he completely fucked it up.
Mhm.
So like but he still has to like he can't help himself. Like he still has to walk around the city to see like, what are people saying? What are they thinking? The TV isn't enough.
Yeah. Wow. Well, we're running up on an hour here. Should we give our final thoughts?
Yeah, if you want to.
Okay. I'll go first on this one.
Yeah.
So, uh, this is my first Bertrand experience. I think it's a great introduction to him. We've talked about the Beast before, but I'm really glad that this is kind of the original exposure that I got to him. I'm very excited to see a lot of his work. He has a very meticulous filmmaking style, and just there's so much planning that goes into his work. And it's clear that every single shot, every moment in this film, so much thought has gone into it. And I really admire that in a filmmaker. I love a filmmaker, of course, I love people like Vin Benders who are like, oh, I never plan anything. I just go on to set and then I put up a camera and I figure it out. And that's fine. And I love that too. But I love these type of filmmakers who spend a ton of time in the planning process. And I think it's because that's sort of my filmmaking style too. That's the way I like to make films, even when I work on other people's films. I like the sort of structure. I like the planning. That's the part of filmmaking that I like. It's the part that I admire. And so to see that in other filmmakers makes me really happy. And also just the trust that Bertrand has in his audience here, which you don't always see with filmmakers, good and bad. I think there's this true fear in a lot of filmmakers, this sort of self-consciousness that people won't understand their work, that they won't get their work. And someone like Bertrand's like, I don't care if you get it. I don't care if you understand my work. I'm just going to make the work. It's kind of like David Lynch. I mean, someone who
Yeah.
just he goes and he makes the work, and then people will ask him about it. He's like, I'm not going to talk about it, right? Because it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter what Bertrand thinks. It doesn't matter if you get it or not. It's merely the art for creating the art itself. And so you see that in the first half, just this masterful filmmaking. I mean, I think you could teach an entire semester just on that first half of that film because it utilizes everything you utilize in film grammar, right? It utilizes proper editing and sound techniques and incredible score and the way that we can tell a story by showing and not telling, and when to use dialogue and when dialogue is valuable and when dialogue isn't valuable, and the way we can utilize non-linear storytelling, and then juxtaposing that with the second half of the film, which is extremely linear and it goes in this very specific order, and we're putting them all in one place and they're sort of trapped, and there's this sense of claustrophobia, like they can't leave, they can never get out, and the sense of martyrdom and uh, the love for this sort of revolutionary attitude that they have, and the sympathy that we have for them, because even though these are people who are terrorists and they're committing a terrorist act, it's proof at the end, right? In those final moments, when they try to surrender, when they put out their hands and say, help me, please, and they're shot anyways, it's that proof that what they did was right in some sense, maybe not killing other people, but the very sense that they needed a revolution, that they needed to fight the government because the government just doesn't give a shit. I mean, they don't care at all who these people are, what these people want. They're completely merciless, even though these, at the end of the day, these are just some kids who, perhaps, I mean, they're most of them, right? Their brains aren't even fully developed. They don't have a full frontal lobe. And yet the world has decided that these are evil human beings that need to be murdered and we shouldn't negotiate with terrorists, as of course we
Mm.
would say here in America. So, really fascinating and interesting film. And I think it's one of those films that is going to haunt me for quite a while. So for me, I'm going to go with a 9 out of 10.
Yeah, I think I'll go with 9 out of 10 as well, and like Bill from that interview that I said like Benello did for Criterion, uh like he said in the interview where he's talking about Nocturama, he said that, you know, at the time in Paris, France, like in the mid 2010s, he said there was that, this feeling that something bad was going to happen, right? And like he said, and he says in the interview, like, I wanted to take this abstract feeling and I wanted to turn that into a movie, and it's sort of kind of like free from kind of like from kind of any kind of like contemporary issues, specifically kind of like honing in on like political or economic issues or anything like that, except for like a couple other a few kind of exceptions.
Mhm.
And I think he does that perfectly. You know what I mean? Like taking like an abstract feeling, like a vibe, and creating like a story out of that um is great. That's pure like filmmaking. So again, I love the movie. It is just like you said, it's meticulous, it's musical, it's beautiful. Uh, it just it does I think it just does everything right. So yeah, a 9 out of 10 for me.
All right, y'all. Thank you for listening. You can find everything I do at Austin Lugo.
I'm on Letterboxd at Retro Andrew, RETR0 Andrew.
And you can find this podcast wherever you hear podcasts. You can also find us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at With Nothing to Say. And thank you all for listening.
Thanks again.